morning, everyone. My name is Sue, and on behalf of the Pamunkey Regional Library, I welcome you to our program, Introducing Native Plants to Your Garden. It is the first in a series of programs developed in a partnership between the library and the Goochland-Powhatan Master Gardeners Association. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to review a few guidelines so we can all enjoy and participate in the program. Please keep your microphones off. This program will be recorded for future use by the library, so if you do not wish to be recorded, please keep your webcam off. The presentation will consist of 5 sections. The chat feature will be available and questions will be answered at the end of each session. We have 2 co-hosts this morning. First is Audrey Hirsch. Audrey, okay. Audrey is a Goochland-Powhatan Master Gardeners Association volunteer, and she is chair of its Speakers Bureau. Today's presenter is Pat Lust. Pat is a retired Longwood University faculty member and a longtime master gardener. She is currently spending a lot of time growing native plants and talking about them. Her backyard nursery focuses mostly on perennials and bushes, but includes a few other types of plants as well. Pat says that if you get to know her, you will probably be adopting more native plants for your own garden. So now let's get started. Here we go. Introducing Native Plants to Your Garden by Pat Lust. Pat?
Good morning. Good morning. Give me a second here to share my screen and we'll get started. All right. Here we go. I've been playing around with native plants for a few years now and having so much fun. I realize that all throughout the nation, there's a real push toward more native plants as we talk about the environment and other things and other reasons to have them. So let's just talk about a few things today, and there's lots more to learn. And I hope that you will go away from this talk today inspired to go out and learn more. Uh-oh, what is wrong here? Okay, something is wrong here. There we go. Have to learn something new every time I do this. My old way didn't work, so there's another way. This first slide is just kind of to focus us a little bit on what we're going to talk about today. I like to think about Virginia plants in 3 categories. The friendly non-natives, the unfriendly non-natives, and our natives, my favorite category. In the upper left, you have a native, the coral honeysuckle, which is a beautiful vine. On the lower left, you have the ailanthus, or tree of heaven, which is one of our most hateful invasive plants, or a non-friendly non-native. On the right, you have two friendly non-natives. We all recognize corn as a friendly non-native, a crop. And marigolds are one of my favorite garden plants, which also are not native, but they're friendly in the garden. So here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. The first 2 and the last 2 sections are fairly short, and the middle section, where we just actually look at a lot of plants, is the bulk of this. So that's kind of where we're going with this. I hope you all had a chance to take a look at the handout that we sent with the link. On the handout, you're going to find everything that's on these slides today. So if you are one of those note taker types, you don't need to write anything down because all of these words are also on your handout. And if you did get the handout ahead of time, you might want to make some notes about some plants that you're going to want to go learn more about. All right, so the first section, what's growing in Virginia? I already said that in my mind, they split into 3 different categories. Friendly non-natives, which is the bulk of what we have in our garden. Unfriendly non-natives, mostly growing along the roads and in barren patches, where they are able to come in and invade. That's why we call them invasives. And then our native plant switch. Those are my friends. I stick this in there because I just like this. It's a beautiful picture of cultivated non-native plants. You got some brassica there. It looks like coreopsis. The red looked like maybe amaranthus. I love to grow amaranthus in my garden. It's not native to Virginia. It is native to the Americas. It is a well-known food plant in earlier times. What do we have here? On the left, we have, you guessed it, kudzu. And on the right, we have one of our favorites, tomatoes. So these are both non-natives, but we hate the one on the left and we love the one on the right. What is an invasive plant anyways? Now, you might look at this and say, oh, isn't that pretty? That covered green forest floor, that is so pretty. Well, it may be visually attractive, but ecologically it's disastrous. Because what you're seeing here is Japanese stiltgrass. And there's a close-up down there in the corner that you can take a look at. Japanese stiltgrass is one of our most hated invasives now. And as a person who helps maintain the Powhatan Trail, we're pulling it out all the time because what an invasive does, generally speaking, is to come in and take up the space and the resources that a native plant would ordinarily take up, but it doesn't give back anything to the ecological system. So here's a nice little list of a definition of an invasive plant. Oh yes, they certainly come in from another region. And let me just comment on that. Sometimes you might refer to a native plant as invasive. And 50 years ago, that would have been perfectly fine. But the term invasive has now come to mean among horticulturists that it is something that doesn't belong there. So for native plants that are a little too aggressive, I just like to call them persistent. And remember, these invasive plants do not contribute to the environment in the same way that natives do. And if a native is a little persistent, well, it might be annoying to you, but it's still contributing to the environment. Oops, I can't do it that way. This, and this is on your handout too, a direct link to this page. It's an excellent list of invasive plants that you can avoid planting. So, you know, don't plant any of these in your garden or anywhere. If you see them, help take them out. You see the second one down, we're not so bothered by Phragmites in our region of the state, but in the coastal region, wow, that is one nasty weed. What about these two? Ha ha, they're both natives. Yeah, we don't like pokeweed and we don't like poison ivy, but they are native plants. They do contribute to the environment. I take them out of my garden every year, and I'm sure you do too, because I don't want them in my garden. I like to choose what grows in my garden, and they're not on my top list. But in in a meadow or out in a wild area somewhere, we should let them grow because the seeds of both provide food for the birds. And that's why poison ivy shows up in your garden every year, even though you pull it all out every year. It's because the birds come by and, you know, deposit a little for you. Oops. Okay. Any questions so far? I mean, I realized that was a really short section, but Audrey, you got anything?
No questions so far, Pat.
All righty, let's go right on then. Okay, what are native plants? And of course, everybody loves our favorite Virginia bluebell, blooms so beautifully early in the spring, and then it kind of disappears. They occur naturally in this region without having been brought here by humans. Now, there is some disagreement about what native actually means because, you know, things were brought here long ago. A lot of people define native currently in the definition in the literature. Native is often defined as pre-European European settling. So, you know, like some centuries ago, but within this millennium. Actually, corn is not native to Virginia, but it came here a millennia or a millennia and a half ago through Native American transport, long before the Europeans ever got here. So, you know, how are you going to think about that? Well, that's up to you. The beauty of native plants is that they like being here. Some other plants that we bring in, we've got to work so hard to cultivate them and give them what they need in order to let them grow here. But native plants like being here. They like the soil, the moisture, the climate, and everything that is here. And also, they have evolved with the wildlife and everything else that is here so that they are part of the ecosystem and indeed a contributor to the ecosystem. Where do you find native plants? Well, now you can find them just about anywhere. 20 years ago, native plants were not such a big deal. And I was just kibitzing a bit before we started that I'm going to have to change the title of this from introducing to something else, because probably most of you have some native plants in your garden by now. So where are they, or where ought they to be? Of course, in nature. We all have friends that go hiking every weekend or every day just to see the plants that are out there. If you've got an area that's been recently disturbed, like a pipeline or something has come through, you might want to think about planting it back with native plants rather than lawn or something else. Some people even replace their whole lawns with native plants. I have a friend over on the northeast side of Richmond, out in the country, who built a new house and seeded her whole lawn to native plants. Last time I drove by, it was blooming beautifully. I don't have the courage to do that in my neighborhood because one of my neighbors did, and all the other neighbors don't like it. So I could keep my lawn. My favorite is mixing native plants with other garden plants. I don't have any gardens right now that are purely one thing or the other. They're all mixed up. I also like to mix vegetables with flowers too, so that's just me. A lot of people have turned to native plants because of a greater interest in pollinators than in the actual native plants, but they all kind of go together. I think I already said they like to live here. They don't require any fertilizer. They don't require pesticides. They don't require water. You might want to, if you're going to transplant them into your garden, you might want to, you know, baby them along a little bit and water them at the beginning, but then they're fine. And with regard to deep roots and erosion, I'm going to show you an interesting picture here in a minute. But native plants, because most of them that you're going to import into your garden are perennials, they're going to develop really, really deep root systems. And they help prevent erosion because when it rains, the water trickles down along those deep root systems rather than running off. And because they all evolve together, they provide friendly shelter for the wildlife. And the most important reason I think we should consider native plants is that many of them are extraordinarily beautiful. The picture that I've imported here for this slide is, it's called the spotted wintergreen or the striped wintergreen. In the spring, it puts up a wonderful white little flower that makes a great berry. This particular photograph I chose was just the leaves because I think the leaves are just beautiful. Oh, here's my root graphic. You see that the ones on the right are all native plants, and yes, this is a drawing, but it's drawn by a professional. This is some water sustainable system graphic. But look in the center there, that little green spot in the center, how deep the roots of your lawn are going to go. Yeah, that kind of gives you a good idea why lawns have runoff. So I can talk about the deep roots of the plants for a long time, but that probably ought to be a whole nother talk because I could go on a bit about the roots. We already talked about them surviving because this is where they like to be, about the erosion control. With regard to soil building, these deep roots, of course, the roots as the plant grows, some dead root sloughs off and decays and adds to the organic matter. And also these roots and some of the imported plants too form interesting mycorrhizal associations with the fungi that are living in the soil. Habitat, what can I say? Native plants are the best for developing habitat. I put in the picture on the left. I don't believe that the Virginia Native Plant Society does anything like this, but the Georgia Native Plant Society actually gives awards to backyard habitats for what they do. And of course, they attract wildlife. Now, some of you don't really want to have the deer in your garden. So you probably don't want to plant things that'll invite them in. But if you have enough space, plant things that'll invite them out to the other end of your property and keep them out of your garden. Now to the beauty part. This is my favorite part about native plants. If you look at the left and the right pictures here, you'll see the same plant. I think the one on the left in nature, out in a field somewhere, captured by USDA, is absolutely gorgeous as it is. But when you bring it into your garden and give it a little fertilizer and a little extra water, you can do what's on the right. That photograph is from Bluestone Perennials, and of course they photograph their best. But those two are the same plants. So look what you can do if you bring it into your garden. There are a whole list of things that you want to consider as you bring natives into your garden. The same color, size and shape, sun or shade, all the things that you would consider in bringing anything else into your garden. What I want to talk a little bit about as we go on is the fourth one there, the habitats, how it behaves when it gets in your garden. And of course, we're all interested in ecology. In case you don't recognize it, that photograph here is flame azalea. They're not native to Central Virginia, but they are native to other parts of Virginia, and they do grow beautifully here. So as you're looking at how it behaves in your garden, some things we're going to talk about are its growth habits, how it reproduces, and persistence. Persistence being, does it reproduce too much, or do you just let it alone, or do you have to do something with it to keep it under control? Okay, that does it for looking at growing native plants. And our next section is going to be actually looking at a lot of plants. So Audrey, nothing yet?
Sorry, I was, no questions.
Okay, good. All right, now as we go on to this next section, so far I've identified where all the photographs come from, and usually I like to use agricultural sites because this is a Master Gardener program, and the agricultural sites are our primary resource. So this next section, where we're going to look at a whole lot of beautiful flowers and talk about them a little bit, all the photographs are from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildlife Center in Texas. I have never had the fortune to go there and visit, but it's on my list. And if you want to go somewhere where native plants are cultivated, I recommend it. Of course, they cultivate plants from all over the country, and some things that are native to Colorado will be there too, not just Virginia. So, and the link to that is on your handout. So let's get started looking at some of my favorite native plants. On the left is the New York ironweed, and the right is the goldenrod. This particular one is a cultivar called Fireworks of the rugosa species of the rugosa species of goldenrods. The New York ironweed and the goldenrod bloom late in the season. So these both provide good habitat and food for pollinators late in the season. I put these two first because these are the first two I brought into my own personal garden. I like them because they bloomed in Ohio, where I'm from, and I could just dig up some and bring them here. And I could dig up some from the farm I lived on in Ohio, not from a public space. And let me stop and just say, don't dig them up from nature. Purchase them from a legitimate place or get them from a friend's garden. There are lots of reasons not to dig them up, which I'll be mentioning along the way, but the biggest one is probably that it's illegal. So don't do it. The ironweed will spread mostly by seed. Some of the goldenrods spread mostly by seed. Some of them spread by underground rhizomes. And for the ones that do, they could become a little persistent in your garden, but I've never had them actually get out of control. These two, the Jack in the Pulpit and Dutchman's Breeches, are both spring ephemerals. They bloom in the spring, and then with the Dutchman's Breeches, the whole plant disappears after they bloom. With the Jack in the Pulpit on the left, you see, if I can get this here, you see this space in the center here. After the plant blooms, then these wonderful red berries appear. So you will see the red berries into the fall, but the rest of the plant will disappear. These both spread mostly by seeds. The Dutchman's Breeches grows on corms, and little critters like to dig up those corms, but most of the corms make little cormlets or cormels or whatever you want to call them, little tiny growths on the side that fall off when the critters eat the main corm. So you're likely to have a crop continue even if you have to wait a year or two for the new plant to make blooms. The trout lilies and the bloodroot will both make nice mats on your garden floor. If you can get a nice spray of the trout lilies when they bloom spring, yellow in the spring, it is absolutely gorgeous. Also, the trout lilies have a wonderful foliage, a little spotted foliage and some reddish color in it. I'm a big fan of bloodroots because that's one of the first plants that I knew about. My dad took me to the woods and we cut open one and watched the red sap come out, and well, of course, that's why they're called bloodroots. They are grow on a rhizome, and the rhizomes of those will spread just like your iris, as long as the critters don't come by and eat them for you. Pink lady slippers grow in certain places, and you should probably not try to move them because they have a symbiotic relationship with their environment. And if you move them, the chance that they'll live probably is small. But I understand that they're not actually rare in Virginia and that you'll find them when you're out walking in the native woods quite well. The one on the right, wild ginger, will grow very well in your garden. Excuse me. Now, the photograph I have there is tipping over so you can see the blossom pretty well. But normally in the garden, they will form that stem will be standing up more, and they'll form a nice green mat. And it's a beautiful, nice green mat of those leaves. And then you kind of have to pick up the leaf and look underneath it to find those flowers. And you can actually touch the plant and play with it and not even notice those flowers if you're not looking for them. They too grow by rhizomes underground. Mayaples, another spring ephemeral that makes a nice, beautiful. They last a little bit longer than some of them, though. And if you have a whole bunch of them, they'll make a nice, beautiful mat, and it's a lighter green mat than the ginger will make for you. Turk's cap lily is one of my favorite. I had some going beautifully for a while, and then like an idiot, I moved them and they got unhappy. So right now I have none, but they grow 6 feet tall, taller than I, and they bloom with, this one has only 2 on a stalk. Most of my stalks had at least a half a dozen when they were happy. And it is a bulb, and you can separate the bulbs to reproduce more, or you can just let it form a dense stand eventually. Wild geraniums. They're kind of hard to get going from seed, but I think I have some in my garden to stay now. They have a probably about a 2-inch wide flower, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful color. It was the native plant of the year for the Virginia Wildflower Association this past year. Tall thimbleweed will grow about, oh, I'd say 3 feet tall, and a profusion of white flowers. Both of these flowers like at least some shade. And who doesn't already have red columbine in your garden? It's probably one of the most popular, one of the easiest to grow. The plant will grow in size, but mostly it reproduces by seed. You'll notice a whole lot of little plants around your plant the next spring. You can dig them up and give them to friends, or let them grow, and establish a drift of columbines or whatever. Mistflower likes a little more water than some of those, but they'll grow in a drier climate as well. I particularly like them for the color. Now, 2 of my favorites, and 2 that the hummingbirds just love, the cardinal flowers. These 2 lobelias both prefer a little bit of shade, probably the blue one a little more shade than the cardinal flower. But they form tall spikes. The blue one, not quite as tall as the red one, but they are both just exquisite. They both produce tiny, tiny, tiny seeds that you'll never even notice, but they will reproduce by seed. The blue one, the great blue, will also form little plantlets around the base of the plant, right above the root on the stem. It will form little plantlets in the fall, and you can pull all those little plantlets off and stick them in a bit of dirt, and they'll grow. They're a fully, it doesn't look like they have much of a root, but they will form the roots. They are fully formed plants, little plants growing around the base of the stem. I think that's so cool. Oops, I think we missed that. Yeah, we almost missed my favorite slide here. Common milkweed and butterfly weed. My preference of the 2, of course, is the common milkweed, because it has a fragrance that, I know not everybody likes the same fragrance, but to me, this is one of the best fragrances in the whole world. I love to sit beside these in the springtime when they're blooming, not only for the fragrance, of course, but the bumblebees love them. And then the buzzing sound, you go outside, and all you nature lovers love to be outside sitting by nature. And this is a great one. Both of these, all the Asclepias, and there are quite a few of them that are native in Virginia, but all the milkweed category, excuse me, are the plant hosts for the larval stage of the monarch butterfly. So it's really important, given we all love monarch butterflies, it's really important to keep these in our environment. Now, I will say, don't try to transplant one of these unless it's contained in a pot. If it's contained in the pot, you have the whole root. But if you try to dig it up in nature, you're not going to get the whole root. You're going to transplant it, and you're going to be disappointed. So I know all of us have gone driving down the road and saw those beautiful orange flowers along the road and thought, I got to have one of those. Let me dig one up. Well, don't. Not only is it illegal, but it won't grow. But I can get you some if you want some, because I start a lot of these from seed. Oh, which reminds me, if you're starting them from seed, these 2, all the Asclepias need to have that dormancy period. So if you collect the seeds in the fall, plant them in the fall. Do not wait to plant them in the spring. If you wait to plant them in the spring, they will not grow that season. They probably will grow the following season after they have a winter outside, but they will not grow that season. So pick them in the fall, plant them in the fall. Dwarf crested iris somehow is a real favorite, especially during blooming season. I had so many go out of my backyard last year while they were blooming, or while people were thinking about irises. They're not like their Dutch bearded iris or German iris or whatever you have in your yard. These get only about, I'd say, 6 inches tall. and they bloom, but they bloom and then go, and they don't bloom again. But the flowers, the leaves will stay nice looking all year. The one on the right, this one again is a controversial one. You might like it, you might not like it. I like it as a ground cover. It's the lyre leaf sage. I have a version in my yard that is slightly redder than this, and it would be called a cultivar, but it is the natural species, which comes in the variety from totally green to almost totally red. The one you're looking at here is a variegated one, which is very pretty and makes a very pretty ground cover. The inset at the bottom is what the flower looks like. And it reseeds. Now, this is one that could become a little persistent in your yard if you don't really want it there, because it does reseed prolifically, really prolifically. I have grown some from seed in the past. I will never need to plant another seed in order to have plants to share with friends, because I can dig up 2 dozen every spring, just like that. Solomon seal. It's just a beautiful spring flower. It blooms with this curved arched leaf stem early in the spring. The flowers will then fall off and the foliage will remain beautiful. It spreads by underground rhizomes, but very, very slightly. You probably won't have to dig it up and thin it out more than once every 5 or so years, maybe more than that. The wild quinine on the right, I must get a picture from my own garden to put into this slot here, because what grew in my yard last summer was way more beautiful than any of the photographs that Lady Bird had on her website. The flower heads were much bigger. You know, if there are 2 dozen flowers on one of these heads, mine had 5 dozen, and they were just gorgeous. The reason I like this plant particularly, besides the flowers are nice, is the leaves. You can see that the color is a little different. It has a bluish tint, but the leaves are huge and they make such a good texture contrast in your garden. So I think wild quinine is a gravely underestimated plant. I suggest that you have some. And quite frankly, I'd be happy to give you some. I have both seeds and plants to share on this one. Blue-eyed grass. Blue-eyed grass is actually a member of the iris family and behaves a lot like that. Excuse me. It grows about 6 inches tall, and it comes in clumps. The clumps will grow in size so that you can then divide up the clumps and spread them out. But you want to keep planting new ones, because I don't find that it's a long-lived perennial. You know, after 5 years, it probably will disappear or die, because I don't know why that happens. But, you know, there are short-lived perennials, and I think that blue-eyed grass is one of those. On the right is green and gold. It's one of the happiest recent additions to my own garden, because I'm always looking for ground covers, and this is a wonderful ground cover. The flowers bloom fairly early spring, but the leaves will stay. And look what I found last week, 2 days ago, in my own yard. This is I put this in here because I'm so excited that I found a ground cover. Well, never mind the weeds around there, because I let them go too as ground covers in the winter. But a ground cover that's going to be nice and even trying to bloom in the middle of the winter. In the fall, there are a lot of yellow things. Maryland golden aster, I think, should be in the nurseries alongside any chrysanthemums in the fall, because it is just as beautiful. Excuse me. The black-eyed Susans, one of my favorites. The Rudbeckia has an awful lot of different species, and some of you probably have brown-eyed Susans in your garden. The brown-eyed Susans bloom a little bit earlier than the black-eyed Susans, and they have a taller habit. But I like the black, personally. You know, everybody has different personal tastes. Personally, I like the black-eyed Susans better, because not only do they bloom a little bit later, but the plant is a little bit sturdier and long-lived. With the brown-eyed Susans, once they bloom, the plants kind of deteriorate, and then you have all this tall brown stuff sticking in the middle of your yard garden, and you have to try to figure out whether you're going to let the brown stuff there so the birds can have the seeds, or take it out because it doesn't look good. With the black-eyed Susans, they go longer toward the end of the season, and then you can just let the flower heads on at the end of the season. Also, like I said, I think it's a sturdier plant. So that's my preference. If you want them to bloom earlier, though, you might want to look at the brown-eyed Susans. All right. Many of us pull that violet out. I have dug so many of those out of my yard and have even said nasty words to some of them, get out of my yard. But you know what? The common violet is the sole plant host for the larval stage of some fritillary butterflies. So if you are pursuing that pollinator garden thing, you have to have some violets in it. Yucca, one of the sturdiest plants, and I think of it as an old-fashioned plant because it was in my grandmother's garden, and so I just always knew about it. It also has an association with an insect. I forget exactly what the insect is called, but it's a symbiotic relationship. The insect needs the yucca, and the yucca needs the insect in order for it to do what it needs to do. Now we come to a few of the exotic things. The rattlesnake master, that's become popular lately among real serious native plant enthusiasts. It's kind of a spaceship looking plant, and it's a really great pollinator plant. And once the flower is done, those little heads there become the seed heads, and they remain erect for a long time. The one on the right, the downy rattlesnake plantain, is actually a Virginia native orchid. And I love it especially for the foliage. It's a little harder to grow, but you can do it. Beautyberry, who doesn't love beautyberry? But if you're going to the nursery to buy a beautyberry bush, make sure you get the Calocarpa americana, not the Japanese one. And you can tell the difference because you see the leaves on this one are fairly wide. The leaves on the Japanese one are really narrow. The nurserymen might try to sell you the Japanese one. Don't let them. Make sure that you get the American one because it's the one that supports our wildlife. The black chokeberry, I understand that you can make jam out of it. I never have, but I can tell you that the birds love it. My chokeberry is in mostly shaded area, and it produces a large crop for the birds every year. These are both bushes. I'm sorry. What we've been doing before now are all perennials, and now we're into bushes. Two other bushes of interest might be the winterberry. I don't think it's so prominent around here as it might be in New England, but it is native here, and it is great in Christmas decorations. The leaves fall off, you got the stems with all the berries on. Buttonbush is another thing that's become very popular lately among native plant enthusiasts. Great pollinator plant. And again, it's a weird shaped flower, but kind of, I like it. I have one growing on the northwest corner of the house where it gets about 4 hours of sun. So it's a shade plant, but it can take some sun. And then the vines, I mentioned the coral honeysuckle before, and the passion flower is native here. You can find it growing along the railroad tracks if you can find any railroad tracks. And then I'm not going to stop because I'm looking at the clock. I'm not going to stop and talk about any of these trees, but they are all listed on your handout. So you can go there. When I look at the flowering dogwood, I always think of the redbud, which grows along the roads around here. And we didn't have it much in Ohio, so I didn't grow up with that. So that's one of the things about Virginia that I really like. And I didn't stick a photograph in here, but on the very last slide, you'll see a beautiful picture of Virginia redbud. Nothing like the big southern red oak. Okay, let's stop for a couple of questions about this, and then I'll talk about a few edible things.
Okay, we have lots of questions and several comments as well.
Okay.
First of all, let's see here. Judy Thomas notes that we have a local chapter of the Virginia Native Plant Society with a demo native plant garden at Bird Park.
Great.
She's also saying, asking about rabbits, deer. Oh, this is from Joan. Rabbits, deer, and others like to eat more than the nursery varieties. One solution I found is to plant a lot of them so the growers don't eat them all. Are there any other solutions that you would suggest?
Well, no, I think that's the best suggestion, and that's why I suggested if you have more property behind your garden, plant stuff back there to attract the deer back there and to some other place. You know, you can build big fences and keep things out by fences. You can spray products on them like liquid fence. You know, I certainly don't recommend anything that harms any of the animals, but some things that will keep pepper spray will help keep things away. But no, you know, if you're planting things for pollinators, you're probably planting things for other things in nature as well. And we all have to live together somehow.
Next question. What are some good native alternatives for foundation plantings, especially something evergreen?
Well, you're talking about bushes, perhaps. You know, I can't answer. I can't answer that question right now. All of the bushes that I've talked about today, I think, are not evergreen. I don't have any in my repertoire that are evergreen. That's a question that I keep asking, and I keep having trouble with my front yard having evergreen things there. So I'm really not going to be very helpful on that question. I'm sorry.
Okay, next comment from Kathy. There is a national program that's available in Virginia. It's the National Wildlife Foundation certification for home landscapes, and she gives the website for that. I'm hoping we can capture all this chat and maybe make it available.
That would be a good idea because I did not include that on the reference list, and that would be a good thing to add to that reference list.
Yeah. Next question, is it illegal to take seeds from wild plants such as ironweed from the roadside?
You know, I asked one of my Virginia wildflower experts that one day, and she did not answer me. So I can't say that it isn't illegal. I can't imagine what harm it causes. That's a good question. And I promise I will investigate that because that is a very good question. If you want some ironweed, call me.
Next question. What is a nativar versus a straight species? Is one better than the other?
That is absolutely a matter of opinion. There are those people who get specific about, was it actually native in this county and not the next county over? And then there are those who don't pay any attention to that. So that is truly a matter of your own personal opinion and taste. For my purpose, because I grow a lot of plants for the Northern Neck Native Plant Society, I try to stick to the straight species as much as I can. But for my own garden, like I told you before, I mix things. So I'm not a purist. I don't believe that one particular garden in the state that is trying to repopulate itself with only plants that have been forever native in that county is actually going to be successful even when they think they are. Because how do you know what the birds have moved from here to there?
Next question, actually it's a comment from Joan. One thing about natives is that they tend to roam. It's hard to keep them contained in a formal type garden.
Yep.
Another question, are there suggestions for plants to follow in succession to the spring ephemerals like mayapple and jack in the pulpit?
You know, I think that's a larger conversation, and I actually started working on, we have a pollinator garden over in Goochland, and in one of the beds there, we're working on actually a succession chart, and that will be posted there And so you can go there and see what plants are in succession. But, you know, I mentioned some of them that bloom in the fall. Most of them bloom in the summer. Well, actually, that's not true. Most of them bloom in the spring and the fall, and in the summer is probably the time when we need to have a bigger list. So, yeah.
Next question. Oh, here's a great one. What aggressive native can I use to replace the stilt grass and creeping Charlie?
Well, you know that lyre sage is pretty good at populating an area, and because it is in that rosette formation, it will spread out and cover some of the things. The green and gold, if it comes in a happy place, will do that. Actually, the crested iris, dwarf crested iris. I'm thinking ground covers because that's kind of what you hinted at here. Those will spread. Now, stilt grass is an annual. So if you're able to keep pulling it up, you'll keep ahead of it if you don't let it go to seed. Now, birds bring things into your gardens, and if you got birds who like bringing that in, they're probably going to bring it in every year. But yeah, I would recommend, you know, I'd first would recommend the lyre sage. Some people don't like that because it is a little aggressive.
Okay, we've got so many questions. I hope we can get through them all.
Do you want to save some of them to the end so we can plod through
Okay,
this?
yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I'm going to go very fast through the next section because it's about edible natives, and they're not quite in my area of expertise as much as the perennials, but I want to mention a few. Well, actually, to answer that last question, wild strawberries might not be a bad thing. Because they will kind of move in and take over. You got to be careful that you actually get the wild strawberries and not some other varieties, but they will come in and form a mat for you. And I'm not going to talk about these very much, just to mention that there are native plants that are edible, because that's a question I often get. What do we have that's edible? Wild rice likes to grow in the swampy areas. Okay, there we go. Ramps and nodding onions. Actually, these have been coming into a popularity with native plant growers lately. And I have not actually myself eaten ramps yet, but it's on my list to do. The fruit of the prickly pear is edible. And they tell me that if you get the flower shoot just as it's coming up before it forms a flower, you can use it like asparagus. Now, these I know. Elderberry is one of my absolute favorites. I grew up with elderberry. My mom made the best elderberry pie. If you've never had elderberry pie, you need to get you an elderberry bush and plant it in your yard and pick them and make a pie. Because we all know blueberries, but we don't all know elderberries. They are delicious fruit. And of course, the birds love them too. And the bees love the flowers. Norton grapes and persimmons they're native. I could talk about the Norton grapes a bit, but since we're running out of time, I won't. Pawpaws and wild plums, and sitting around the fire in the evening cracking nuts and then making a nice black walnut cake. Oh, yum. Okay. Why don't I go on through the next section so I can get because the next section has the information resources in it, and then we'll finish up with questions. Okay, Audrey? Okay. This is one of your best resources. This book has come out recently for our region. They're working on it for every region in the state, but this particular book, you can get the hard copy. We have some at the extension office, or I prefer to use it online, and your handout has the link to it. It is an excellent resource. It chooses some that are particularly good for our region. And all the questions that you've asked will probably be answered in there somewhere if you want to take a look around. So here's a list of the resources that I've put on your handout. The book I just mentioned, the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. One that I use a lot is the Virginia Plant Atlas. It's an online resource, and it will, some of you know about the flora of Virginia, that big book, what, 3 inches thick? There's supposed to be a field guide, but who's going to carry that in their backpack? The Virginia Plant Atlas is an online resource that has all the same material. You might want to think about joining the Virginia Native Plant Society. It's fairly active in Virginia. They have a lot of programs. And then if you're on Facebook, sign up for Virginia Wildflowers. A friend of mine does that Facebook page, and she posts something every day. She introduces you to a lot of flowers, and she usually talks a little bit about the flower. As a matter of fact, today on Facebook, my green and gold was featured because it's blooming now. I was surprised to open up Facebook this morning and see that picture there, but it was. So this picture at the bottom here is trilliums. Where I grew up in Ohio, they're so prolific that they'll make a white carpet across the floor of the forest in the spring. They're not listed as native in Goochland and Powhatan counties, but they are in some other counties in Virginia, and they will grow here. Where to get plants? The Ginter plant sale in the fall. Our Master Gardener unit usually has a spring garden fest, and once we get past COVID, we'll be doing that again, and we always have a lot of native plants. If your local nursery doesn't have a section on natives, ask them to get it, because they will sell them. There are some specialists. I'm not going to mention any of them, but if you contact me, I can tell you who they are in the area. There are a lot of online resources. I use a couple of online resources, especially for seeds. And then best of all, from your friends. You go have coffee or tea with your friend and dig up some stuff, and then invite them to your yard to dig up some of your stuff. So they're beautiful. They collaborate well with wildlife, and they contribute to the health of the soil. Hal Mann's recipe for going native is on your handout. I'll let you go there to find it. Hal Mann is a gardener in Ohio who, when he retired, converted his whole garden and yard to natives. Now, you don't have to go whole hog, but he did. And then just as a final point, I already mentioned native plants are wonderful because they are low maintenance, and they love to grow where you plant them, and they provide ecological services. So now we can get back to the questions. I see we have a couple of minutes left.
Yes, yeah, and we have a bunch more too.
Oh boy.
First, is yucca really native to Virginia? I thought it was from Mexico.
No, it is native to Virginia.
Next,
The yucca filamentosa is. Now, there may be some other yuccas that are not.
right. But this is a comment, and I agree. Buttonbush looks like a coronavirus.
Well, then, maybe it should be the plant of the year. Or maybe we should kill them all. I don't know.
Next is, do you have an opinion about red chokeberry, Aronia arbutifolia, versus black chokeberry?
I don't. I have both of them.
Okay.
I like them both. So there's the visual, and I don't know if they taste the same or not, because I have not, they're not the most desirable berry you're going to have in your garden for human consumption. They're called chokeberries because they have a bitter taste about them. I have tasted them off the bush, and they are edible. They're just not tasty.
Next is blackberry lily native. Is periwinkle native, invasive?
Periwinkle is on the invasive list, I believe. It is not native. And what was the other one?
Blackberry lily.
I'm pretty sure that's not native.
How about suggestions for controlling these crazy vines that choke the trees?
Yeah, well, as you can tell from what all I've talked about, that is not my area of specialty. With the vines, like like the, what do you call it? The Japanese honeysuckle, the yellow honeysuckle that gets in there. Just chopping them out will keep them down. I'll have to confess that while I rarely use chemicals, when sometimes those kinds of things get too bad to be controlled by other means, you have to resort to what else is available. And you can check the pest management guide for those kinds of things.
Okay.
A lot of handwork, a lot of handwork.
A few more questions. Here's a comment from Kathy. Yawpin holly is a native evergreen that's beautiful, has berries, and the leaves are round, not spiky. The straight species is tall, so if you need a shorter variety, get Nana.
Okay.
Next, we had a question about Bird Park, and someone kindly answered that. Next question is, did you mention pycanthum? Sorry, mountain mint. It's great.
I have a picture of mountain mint in this presentation somewhere, but I did not mention it. And yes, thank you for mentioning it because it is great. It smells good too.
And our last question, what kind of soil do native plants prefer?
The soil you have in your garden. The soil you have in your garden before you mess with it.
And I think that's all the questions we have.
All right, then I thank you all very much for showing up today. And I especially thank those of you who stuck it out clear to the end. And I'm going to turn it back to the hosts at this point.
Just as an aside, everyone stayed till the end. So thank you all.
Wow.
Okay, well, Pat, thank you so much for taking time to be here today and for your informative presentation. I know that I learned a lot. And as you predicted, I'm sure we will be adopting more native plants to our own gardens.
Good.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And to all of our participants, if you know someone that couldn't be a part of today's program, please let them know that it will be accessible from the library's website by clicking on the link to our YouTube channel or by selecting Virtual Programs for Adults page. And don't forget that the library has great resources for gardeners. There are materials in the branches and also through our digital library. And I just wanted to mention, you may want to browse this Horticulture magazine, which has a very timely article to Pat's presentation in it. And you can get that at our branches. And I would like to invite you to attend our next program, which will be on landscape design on February 13th, which is again the second Saturday at 11 a.m. You may register now at the program calendar the same way you did for today's meeting. That's at www.pamunkeylibrary.org. So thank you all so much for joining us today. See you on February 13th.